So welcome, Rabbi Poupko. I am so excited to meet you because I've been reading your articles in a number of different publications around the New York area and even beyond that, actually online for a while. And you speak so beautifully and really substantively about your experience with infertility. So first of all, just welcome and please, for the people who don't know you, please introduce yourself.
Thank you. So first of all, thank you for having me and thank you for the amazing work that you guys do. I write a lot, I share a lot, and so among one of the things that I write about for the past few years, occasionally, not everything I write, but I do write about the topic of infertility in the Jewish world, but specifically in the Orthodox world, where there's a whole new set of social and just halachic challenges that people added on. If infertility is extremely difficult in general society, and then in Jewish society, then in the Orthodox world, there are many more layers of complexity that are added by Orthodox halacha and also by just the social fabric and norms of Orthodoxy. So I've written a lot about that. Yeah, so some of that was just because it's a topic I took interest in. I've spoken about it for a while. And part of it is also because of the journey my wife and I have been through, in the years that it took for us to have children. And so, yeah, so it's been a lot of writing and occasionally speaking about this topic. And it's always interesting because, on the one hand, it's something that I write out as a just private person who's been through this, but also there's just, the rabbinic aspect and the aspects of Jewish law, and then just having an online presence and people event sometimes after I write something reaching out privately, and so it's been a journey of sharing and also learning about what people go through.
I am deeply in awe because you really share you really share so much, and yet obviously all of us know that have been through this. I mean, myself, I've been through many years of secondary infertility and had 6 miscarriages, and there's so much that's public, but obviously there's so much that's kept behind closed doors. There are things that I will never share publicly because that's something that's personal to myself and my husband. So I'm curious if you could maybe like delve a little bit more into that piece specifically for you. You and sort of take us back. You got married, you and your wife got married, and I presume, and I don't know you so well, but I'm presuming that you had the same dream. You and your wife had the same dream that many of us do in the Jewish community, and especially in the frum and the religious community. We think, we're going to have X number of kids, and we think we're going to be able to plan exactly when those kids come and, the exact timing between one and the other. I'm guessing that things didn't exactly turn out the way you hoped. Can you sort of take us back to the beginning and share your story as to, from the time you got married until when you realized that things weren't going well, and then when you decided that you wanted to share, and what was the impetus for sharing publicly?
Thank you. Yes, I think something that really makes a point to the broader community is that when we got married, my wife was already not only a doctor, but she was teaching in medical school. And I was a rabbi who has spoken about this, and there's all the rabbinic trainings about this. And I'll tell you this, we knew nothing about this topic, meaning the amount that there is to know before you go through it personally and after is just incomparable. And like I said, like you can have all the knowledge and all the courses and all the whatever, and you have not touched on the tip of the iceberg of this subject. I think that's to me one of the biggest shocks, and also just as it doesn't matter how much awareness people go through in certain courses and trainings. I think it's important to understand that to all the people who have not been in it, you just have no idea. You have no clue. Obviously, there's people who specialize in this as physicians or whatever. Yes, they do know, but in general, people do like to kind of be like, oh yeah, I think I once heard a lecture, a podcast, or whatever it is. And on every possible level, on the medical level, on the halachic level, on the social level, the psychological level, really, 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 if you have not been through it, you really just do not begin to understand it.
I just have to say, like, everything you're saying is so like spot on. As a medical professional myself, learned about infertility. I learned about miscarriage, pregnancy loss. I was a pediatrician and watched, my patients deal with this, and yet going through it myself, completely different experience. Completely. Like everything you're saying is so 100% spot on.
Yeah, and thank you. I think sometimes the worst offenses come from people who project that, oh yeah, I know this. I get it. Like the people
Totally.
who are, whether it's the people who are judging or in it's just people do not know. So I think that's one of the biggest aspects that was clear at the beginning. It's like, wow, who knew? And we thought we knew it all. It turns out we didn't. So that's I think one thing that was shocking at the beginning of the process. I think as humans, also in our very essence, in our DNA, the number one thing we do when we go through a challenge, not even as humans, right? As just mammals, creatures, whatever it is, when something difficult happens, the first thing you do is to look around and say, okay, who else is in this with me? Like, am I alone in this? Are there others with me? And that I think is an added difficulty, regardless of whether you're Orthodox Jewish or not, is the issue that it's not easy to be like, wait, who else is going through this? It's not easy to necessarily discuss it with other people. And so that's just an added element to this, is the real isolation that comes with fertility challenges. I think that's also a big deal. Again, I can't say what it's like for people who are not Jewish or not Orthodox. Of course, everyone has their challenges and how difficult it is. But that's one of the also the first things that you encounter. Is like, wait, who else is going through this? You kind of try and think who you may know who might have been through it, but you don't really know. And that's also part of what motivated me to write a few times publicly about it, because I remember the times where I'm like, wait, who else is going through this? Or you're doom scrolling on the internet, on social media, TED Talks, whatever it is, trying to get an idea of how to make sense of this. I think that's another aspect that was part of our journey and probably many people's journey. And then another thing is it just in the Orthodox world, like it's very common to for people to ask, how many kids do you have? Like it's not even we went to Israel once for Pesach, and we get into the taxi and the guy's like, oh, hi, how are you? Where are you from? Married? Yes. Do you have kids? No. Why not? This is like this demand of like, wait, what's going on with you?
But
And
that's
I
also
think,
a classic like Israeli type response, right? Because they just like get in your business right away. Like, why not? Why don't you have kids? Like,
right,
it's
what's going on?
classic.
So and then you go into the judgment. Like there's the people who will try and tell you what they think, why not. There are the people who will demand explanations. There are the people who will offer friendly advice without being asked. And so there's all of that. And so then above that, I think working as a teacher, working in the rabbinic world, where sort of, there's more eyes on you than if you're just an accountant sitting at a desk. then I think that was also an added factor in it, because it's actually really sweet. I think it was fifth grade that I was teaching, and kids would ask, Rabbi, do you have any kids? And like one of the kids comes and they're like, oh, Rabbi, like I'm praying for you or whatever it is. There's that, and then there's the sometimes people who are teaching and don't have children are like, they find fulfillment in teaching other people's kids. But sometimes it could be more painful to be like, okay, you teach all these kids, but you don't have kids of your own. I think that's sometimes also something that factors in. Yeah, so I think all that has been at play, and just it's been a journey, and it's one that's painful, and it's painful just because of the reality of it, but sometimes there's pain that's not necessary. Sometimes there's pain that comes from other people. Sometimes there's just the isolation of it. So yeah, all that has been a lot.
Can you speak about like was there a specific like moment that you said, like now I need to go public and now I need to, talk about this? Or was it like this like sort of as you described, sort of like this load getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and the more people said something or the more comments that you got, or just the experience of being in community in general, like what was it that specifically made you say like, I need to now do something about this? Like I need to start talking and sharing more of my experience so other people don't feel it.
Right, so I think the biggest prompt for speaking about it, it's like a sort of a trauma that you're going through, right? You're in some jungle or whatever it is. You're in a difficult situation. A lot of times, the first time you'll speak about it is when you feel like you're somewhat out of it. So I think the most I've spoken about it is once we've had our breakthrough, and we've had a child. But I actually did write something. Sometimes just writing I think I don't know which Jewish writer it was who said this, but they said that a good writer is not someone who loves to write. It's someone who can't resist not writing. Sometimes it's just like
Wow.
you feel like it's not like you sit down and like, oh, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna write something. It's more like you have an impulse to write, and and get that out there. So I did, when we had, forgot which number miscarriage it was, when we had another miscarriage. uh I did write, and it's interesting because it's sort of, this is somehow how writing can work. It's another conversation where I didn't share it with anyone except for one. I'll speak about that in a second, but I did write an article about it, so it wasn't something I was able to talk about. I was able to write about it, but we did have a miscarriage, and I think what was the office where we were being seen was very close to the school I was teaching in. And so we went for a checkup. We went for a ultrasound. So let's say I leave school at 11 or 10, and we go, and we're given this horrible news. And you know with everything that comes with it, and like, what do you do with yourself? So my wife couldn't go back to work, and we figured that just me sitting at home with her at this time was not something either of us would find helpful. And so I went back to work. And so I come back to work. I can tell you what time it was because that's how the schedule works. And I go back to work, and it's like 12:45, 12:50, and someone has to run benching. And the principal is like, okay, can you run benching today? So I do. And it's like I have tears in my eyes, and I'm singing benching to a room full of kids. And it's just that mixture of emotions, I think, that was very traumatic, where it's like you just had a loss and you're sort of carrying on. And I think someone came over to me and asked me, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah. But yeah, so then after that, I did write something about it. Um, yeah, so I think sometimes you go public because just of, some kind of plan. Sometimes it's just what comes out in the moment. And then, like I said, after we, oh no, I actually, even beforehand, I did write about this subject. I went on a podcast, not a Jewish podcast, maybe one or two, about infertility at the time. And I've spoken about it, I've written about it enough that if anyone wasn't sure or had their suspicions, if what was going on with us, they may have gotten an indication, they may have not. I didn't write about it or speak about it in a way of sharing a personal story. I spoke about it more from the perspective of Jewish law and sort of like we're speaking about it now, the way it is in Orthodox society. Um, yeah, and that's the way it went about. Uh, but I think just from my personal experience, not to sound too altruistic, but I did always have in mind the people that I knew were going through what we've been through, which is the pain of the loneliness, of the isolation, of the thinking that you're all alone in this. I think that was always my number one goal. There's actually a humorous story. I don't know if this is the place to bring it up. That definitely.
Definitely the place to bring it up. Definitely.
So, so there's a guy who is, I don't know if you want to call him famous, infamous. Guy. He's a professor in Brooklyn. His name is Ari something. He's a man who donated his sperm to. He has more than 100 children. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
Yes, I mean, I don't know that I know this specific person, but I've heard a number of stories of people who have
No,
been
this guy's
very prolific sperm donors. Yes.
so I think they have in Israel, they made a movie about him.
Okay.
In the US they call him the Sperminator. And
Okay.
anyhow, so we were living on the Upper West Side and he was giving a talk and someone asked me if I would come speak. So despite the I guess the a bit of a unorthodox vibe about the whole story. I went and spoke, and then the I think the New York Post had an article. They did. The New York Post had an article about it, and they made some jives and kind of made fun of it. But even in that, I think that my goal was always, when I spoke there, it was always to be there for the one or two people that you're never going to hear back from, you're never going to hear about, and that's been the goal. One thing that I've written about multiple times that I think that, you know, you, I say I always write and do a video for an audience of one, right? There's that one person who really
100%.
know that like it was worth it. Like it doesn't matter what happened, what backlash you got. There's one person that it was like really worth it to write about for. So one topic I got very into was, and I'm not coming here to, tell people one way or the other, but the whole issue of supervision, infertility treatments. I've written multiple articles about it. I've spoken to many.
Just explain for people who don't know what you're talking about. Just explain what you mean by supervision.
I don't know if you want me to make my whole argument here, but if you're okay with it, I will. Just give a
Give the
summary.
definition. Just give
Okay,
the summary
so
definition. Yeah.
there are multiple organizations who in one way or another make the claim that Orthodox law requires some kind of kosher supervision, rabbinic supervision in the process of IVF treatment, supervising transfer of eggs, of sperm, and so that's a claim that's made, and it doesn't have so much backing, meaning the people that you go who are quoted or whatever it is, you go, you ask, and you say, wait, is this a thing? Like, how sometimes people have these ideas, forget about that. How Passover, some people are like, our family, doesn't eat potatoes with bananas, whatever it is. They have the thing, and you're like, wait, that's a thing? And you're like, no, I'm pretty sure that's not a thing. So that gave me the that vibe, and I went and I did very hard due diligence, And I'm like, I'm pretty sure this isn't a thing. Like there are people who say it, but like it's not a thing, and it's definitely not universal, and it's definitely not a matter of consensus. Uh Anyhow, so I did that. I wrote about that, and actually two stories I had that, and then I made a few articles that were persuasive, saying that there is no need for supervision. And I think two stories that made it very worth it for me. One was a extremely prominent rabbi who gets many, many people asking him for questions in this field. Who I discussed it with him, and just like I started off saying, like, you don't know what you don't know until you actually encounter it. So this rabbi is very knowledgeable. He's an authority on it. And I spoke to him, I'm like, is this a thing? He's like, I hear people say it. I'm like, but it's not a thing, right? And he's like, anyhow, he's like, yeah, no, it's not a thing. Turns out that he comes to me a few weeks, months later, and he's like, right after we spoke, this couple came to me and they were having some cycle transfer, whatever it is, over a holiday, a Jewish holiday, and they would not have been able to get supervision for it, which means they would miss it, which means maybe they wouldn't have a kid because of that. And he's like, thank you, because I'm like, yeah, you don't need that. That was one thing. And then I got another thing after I wrote it, I got a message from someone who lived out of town. And they're like, I just saw your article. Is this true? And I'm like, here are the names of the people who I asked, and it's true. And I didn't hear, and they asked because they had also a cycle they needed. And to me, just knowing that that person was able to get whatever treatment they needed without having to worry too much, I think that was worth it. So sometimes when you share a story, it's not actually for a broader audience. You kind of cast out a net, but it's really for the one or two people who that really is going to be transformative for.
Absolutely. I love the way you said, when I write, I have an audience in mind of one. And I very much, when I started, I was supposed to have a baby. We're now 5 years old, but when I started it, the thing that I thought about in my head was I just wanted that one person out there to not feel the same pain and isolation that I felt. And if I could do something to help that person, then whatever it is, then it would be worth it. I mean, thank God, or I always kind of say in my head, like, I wish it was different. I'm grateful that we're able to help so many more people than just one. I wish obviously it was different and fewer people were dealing with such pain, but you never write for just you never write for the millions. You write for that person out there that is feeling that deep sense of pain that you are. So I very much deeply resonate and appreciate that. um so talk to me specifically about, your latest piece actually spoke about the unique pain in the Orthodox community, in the Frum community, and why it's so hard for us. And I'm using myself in this. I am part of the modern Orthodox community. I did not grow up religious, but I became religious at the end of high school. And my husband also did not grow up religious. So we kind of straddle both worlds and know definitively that there is a unique kind of pain that living in the Frum community just really gives off because of the emphasis on family and children and so on. Can you speak a little bit more about that, and maybe even share some anecdotes or things beyond, like, what your student said to you, like some things that you've noticed over the years in terms of your own journey that really struck a chord with you?
Yeah, so there's a lot that's been written about isolation and infertility in general society, and the inability to discuss it openly. And then you have in the Jewish community where the desire, we're 3,500 years old, our people. So the pressure on people to have a child is huge, and the discussion, and we celebrate children, which is great, but then those who don't, are left out of the party, and that's very, very painful. And I think the Orthodox community, I'll look at it just to give an example geographically. So Orthodox people live usually in the same communities, right? So there's places where if you're Orthodox, you can't just move to Manchester, New Hampshire, wherever it is, because you got to live with a place where there's a synagogue and a kosher pizza shop and a grocery. So everyone does live
Not
together.
everybody has the kosher pizza shop, but yes,
Not everyone. Yes. Yeah.
we all want the kosher pizza shop if we don't have it. So, but
Yeah.
yes, keep going.
But
Sorry
it's a metric of the Orthodox community. Like you go to people before they even ask if there's a synagogue, they're like, is there a kosher pizza shop?
totally, totally, totally.
So our life is very communal. And so for most people, it's like some Orthodox community actually excuse the term, but it looks like a continuation of a dormitory life. So like, okay, you went to Gush for yeshiva. Okay, so you'll be living in this neighborhood with the same people you've gone to elementary school with, same people you went to summer camp with, the same people you went to college with, and so on. And so there's this like expectation that everyone moves along the conveyor belt together, goes to the same schools, summer camps, lives in the same communities. And then the next natural step is sends their children to the same daycare and school, except not everyone fits into that. And then you have a very, very painful situation. One of the most painful uh, things for a human being is social exclusion. It's a physical threat, right? People who are isolated, excommunicated, lonely, those are things that have a real impact on you. And so the people who are without children are suddenly not intentionally, not with anyone's bad intention, but they often find themselves out of that circle. Not always, but often. And that is coupled also just as part of the Orthodox lifestyle with everyone's business being everyone's business. I mean, it's generally true about Jews that, you ask about your friends and your family, how everyone's doing, but then it's also, do you have children? Why not? And whether it's in front of your face or behind your back, you know that people are like making judgments like, why don't they have kids? And people kind of decide to make your business theirs. My wife was actually working in New York as a neurologist, and like, Jewish people who would come to her as patients would start like giving her unprompted advice.
Oh my
Uh,
God. Oh
yeah,
my,
yeah. In her
wow.
case, it was actually somewhat, she took it humorously because it was like often these old Manhattan bubbies coming with their advice. But so then it wasn't so offensive, but like people just kind of give unprompted advice and feedback and speculations and thoughts. I remember, through going through everything, one guy, we were having a political discussion, and he's like, you know what, you and your feminist wife can whatever. And did he mean that he was like, but I definitely have heard people say like, oh, they don't have children, the wife is such a feminist, and they have no idea what's going on in anyone's life. And I think so, yeah, I think that's something that does happen. You get that. I'll give you two examples of sort of, you never know how something is being sensitive and not sensitive. I had a newsletter, like an email newsletter. I would send every Erev Pesach, I would send like a happy Passover, and every Rosh Hashanah, Shana Tova. Pretty standard to all of my contacts. So then someone, after I was married for a few years, someone who is never in contact with me, and probably I spoke to a few years before, sent me back as a response, which I guess they thought was sensitive and nice. They sent back, thank you, Refuah Shalema, which means God should heal you soon, and Shana Tova. At which point I stopped sending a newsletter because it was so hurtful to see this person who didn't necessarily come from a place of care. Maybe it was like fleeing sympathy in their mind, like, oh my gosh, I feel so bad. Let me write Refuah Shalema. But that actually is something that's very hurtful, as opposed to sort of like around the same time Rosh Hashanah, another person who I knew really, really was caring and compassionate and was thinking of us. Uh, when I sent them a Shana Tova, they're like, we're thinking of you guys. This should be a good year. That's it. They didn't say, and that was actually very touching. So you can have things that are very similar. One is going to be extremely meaningful. One is going to be extremely hurtful. It's not always easy to know which is going to be which. Probably better always to err on the side of caution and not say something that acknowledges what you think is someone's predicament, but you have no idea about. And so, yeah, that is that's I think part of it in the Orthodox world. It's like that everyone is so enmeshed in each other's lives, and there's this social component, religious expectation, everything that people have a child, and that's tough. And I wrote that's why often you'll see people are geographically excluded. So if all your friends are moving to the suburbs, if all your friends are moving to this place where people have good early childhood and school programs, whatever it may be, you will not be moving there, and you're excluded. I'll give another Orthodox story. So thankfully at the time I was working in a place in Manhattan, which actually was helpful to us because we did need to spend often time on a weekend or a holiday in close enough to the clinic we were at. So I was working in one shul, but I wasn't supposed to be there on the weekend. So we come there for the weekend because we're supposed to be there. And I go to a different show. And someone comes over to me, and really, like, it's the kindest thing you can think of, where they come over to me and they're like, "Oh, hi, it's good to see you, Shalom Aleichem." And he's like, "What brings you to the neighborhood?" And so a question like that, which is so welcoming and kind and everything, actually it can be mortifying. And you start scrambling for the best lie you can think of, because you don't want to say, we're here for treatment. I think by the way, then I was working in a show that's near Sloan Kettering. And since then, I stopped asking people, when I saw someone I didn't know, I stopped asking what brings you here, because I knew the answer could be tough. By the way, on another, I don't know if this is humorous or what, but when I was once for Yom Tov Sukkot or Pesach in Boston, people in Boston often, people come there for the Harvard, hospitals. And I come there and someone's like, "Good Yontif." They're like, "Where's your relative at? Like, in which hospital?" And I'm like, "No, I'm actually just here because I'm here for the holiday," which I was. But a lot of times people, make those assessments, which are half sympathetic, half sometimes intruding, and that, yeah, that's the thing with Orthodox life, that it's so everyone's so enmeshed, and there's so much actually chesed and care for the other, but with that comes sometimes the assumption that you're entitled to the knowledge about what the other person's going through, and that's yeah, that's hard.
I remember actually my husband and I were going through, we had some treatments also at Cornell at some point, and we were there for Shabbos. And I remember my husband was like trying to figure out like where he was going to dive in and who he might run into and what he was going to say. So like exactly, to your point of, because our communities are so enmeshed, and that we deeply care about the other, and it's so like we always get so excited when we see someone in a place that we don't expect to see them. Like it's an exciting thing, like, oh, it's so nice to see you. Like you don't expect, a person who lives like at that point, yeah, like we were living in Riverdale and we were in Manhattan, like you don't expect someone to show up in a random shul around, a random shul in Manhattan. So when you see that person, you're like, you go over there like, "Hey, how are you? It's so nice to see you. What are you doing here?" Just exactly the same way you just mentioned. Just this natural welcomeness and the warmth that people that we deeply care about each other can be so hurtful, and also just intrusive. Like, you're not necessarily ready to share. Remember my husband, like we were like trying to concoct like stories before he went off to school, like, okay, what are you going to say? How are you going to say it? Like, who's like, it's hard. It's very, very, very hard. Um, Rabbi Poupko, to kind of like sort of close this loop here and to end off, as a person and as a couple who've been, in this world for such a long time, thankfully, I know you do have you are on the other side of this, and you do have, I believe you have two children. Is that correct? Three. Okay. I wanted to make sure I was getting my numbers correct. What advice would you give to people who are, one, for the people who are in it themselves in terms of how to manage these like communal expectations, like one or two just quick examples that really helped you try to navigate some of these pieces for yourself, knowing that the community was going to ask and not be as sensitive as you necessarily would have wanted. And then maybe on the flip side, just some pointers of like, a couple of things not to say, or a couple of things to say for people who are just in the community at large, or maybe family members of people who they may suspect might be dealing with some kind of difficulty.
Right, so there's two parts to the question. There's the those going through it and those who are sort of around. So to the people going through it, I hate to say this, but I will say be rude. If someone asks you a
I
question,
love that. Yeah, keep
yeah,
going.
like you don't have to feel bad for making them feel bad for asking an inappropriate question. If someone asks you a question, you can say, "Excuse me." You can say, "That's a strange question," which it may be. You can say that's inappropriate, or you can just make a joke about it. But the feelings of the I'm going to call it perpetrator do
Oh
not are not
gosh, yeah.
are not of concern to you. Yeah, be rude. Be rude. Put them on. Just you can tell people something's none of their business. You can tell someone that's an inappropriate question. You can lie. You can say, we're here because we heard there's great Kiddush in this shul, and that's fine. Whatever it is, if someone steps over their boundaries, even with good intentions, don't sacrifice your own well-being because they asked an inappropriate question. Obviously, humor is sometimes the best way to diffuse these type of things. But so if you can do it in a way that's humorous and makes everyone laugh, great. If not, you can tell people that that's just not an appropriate question, or you can just ask them, "Excuse me." By the way, it doesn't always help. There's people who just don't get it. But
Wait, you didn't hear the question? Let me tell it to you again.
yeah,
Why are you here? Just kidding.
yeah. So yeah, that's one thing I would say. Always, obviously I don't need to say this, but look out there, look, there are, for people who do appreciate this, and that's part of the work that you guys do, is there are support groups, there are people you can reach out to. You're not alone in this. You obviously are alone in it in many ways, but there are others that you can reach out to. You don't even need to reach out to people in today's day and age. You can look for, stuff online. That's another thing. And just sometimes maybe this is just my personal coping strategy, but sometimes humor is the only way to do it. Just sometimes you just have to laugh at how insane life becomes, and how you're in these situations. And from the perspective of the community, I would say just in general, just someone once told me they this is not related so much to infertility, but like or I'll just say something else. Like people sometimes it's not anyone's fault, but people are like, "Oh, where does your father live?" And I'm like, "My father's dead." And so like it is what it is. But I would say that sometimes avoiding the usual question, like if you have an indication the person is interested in the question, is fine. But in general, something healthy our community can benefit from as a whole is less personal questions. You can ask questions without being too personal. And so I would say just avoid, and this is just a healthy thing, because it's not just infertility. There are people who have children with unique conditions. There are people who have children who ended up in all kinds of places. There are people who have marital situations that are complicated. There are people who have parental situations that are complicated. So in general, expectations that expect some kind of uniform family situation are things that you should avoid. If someone volunteers information, take it. But as a community, we definitely need to lower the amount of personal questions that we ask. And then I would say care for people without indicating that you are referring to anything specific. There's so many, single people who are like, don't go to weddings because everyone's like, Emer Tashem by you, and that's very hurtful. So in general, I think any acknowledgement of someone's particular situation is hurtful. If you invite them for a meal, if you include them in something, I think that's something nice. But yeah, I think that as a whole, we need to make sure our questions are less intrusive.
I love that. And I'm so glad that you brought up the single community, because when you were speaking earlier just about the isolation and the different social norms, so much of, what we talk about in terms of infertility really applies to people who are single as well, because they're not also following that prescripted, that path of, you get married at this point, you move to this community, you send your kids to the same school, the camps and all of that. I mean, it sort of, it stops at the moment. Instead of stopping at the moment of, having children, it stops at the moment of finding, not
Yeah.
finding a spouse. And so that isolation is deeply similar for someone who has not found a partner yet.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm sure you've seen the movies. Her name is Roma Bernstein. I think she wrote Fill in the Gap. She wrote there's a few films that were very popular Israeli films by this woman in Israel. Anyhow, so my cousin was working on writing a movie with her, and I was single at the time, and she's like, and I think for those who watch, there's this set called Surugim, which is sort of
yeah,
like,
yeah,
but
yes.
anyhow, so they were working on, they wanted to write something about singlehood, and she asked me like, can you explain to me, because she had this run-of-the-mill life where she got married, had kids, etc. Can you explain to me what the like, what's going through your head, how it is to be single like that? So I said, just imagine a young Orthodox boy growing up, and everyone has a bar mitzvah, but somehow he just doesn't become bar mitzvah. Like he looks around and he's terrified. Like everyone becomes bar mitzvah, but somehow he stays in this, life cycle that he just doesn't cross that line. So I said, in many ways, that's the experience of being single in the Orthodox world, because the process of marriage is very much that life cycle. Like you're born, you have a bris, you have a bar mitzvah, and then there come these life cycles that all of your peers are going through, and they're not happening for you, and that's a very isolating and frightening thing. So I think yeah, that's the place that people can feel they're in also.
I love that. I think that it's a perfect example, because it's a universal experience for every person in the Jewish community. Every boy has a bar mitzvah, and to think that someone might not, or can't for whatever reason, it's deeply unsettling, and we can all imagine it ourselves. And sometimes infertility is hard to explain. Sometimes being single is hard to explain, but that example is absolutely brilliant. Rabbi Poupko, if people want to reach out to you, where can they find you?
I'm all across social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter. So yeah, I would say those are the ways. Pretty responsive. And yeah, and if anyone wants to reach out, please do. Uh, yeah, it's an honor to be able to, first of all, to speak to this experience. It's an honor to speak to you and see all the work that you've done, and your work stood out. Also, I got to see what you post on social media, and that in and of itself makes people feel less lonely, more acknowledged. And so thank you for the work that you guys do. And God willing, everyone should have the relief and the comfort and the community that they need.
amen, amen. And we all are dealing with different pieces of this, taking different slices of this experience and trying to bring comfort and support to different parts of the community. So thank you for everything that you do.